This is it, folks. We have entered the AI era of desperation and disillusionment. Is this the AI bubble popping? Maybe. There is certainly credible evidence, and I will walk you through it, but I'm a little hesitant to make any outright predictions simply because who knows where any of this is going. Just a warning that I am overcaffeinated, underslept, and a lot of this is my personal musings on the AI bubble. I will provide evidence for what I say where and where I can, but just take what I say with a grain of salt. This video is largely unscripted, and I'm making it in response to things that have been happening in the news. I wanted to get this video out as quickly as possible, so I decided not to go through the very arduous and labor-intensive task of writing a perfectly manicured, perfectly ordered script. So just bear with me a little bit. Just bear with me. I meant what I said at the top of the video when I said we were entering the era of AI, desperation, and disillusionment. There are two specific chapters to this era that we're in right now. The desperation chapter, which I will get into first, and the disillusionment chapter, which I will get into later. Within the desperation chapter, there are two very important ingredients to keep in mind. The two ingredients to keep in mind are the shrinking pool of money, which is causing a lot of panic in the investment world, a lot of panic in terms of IPOs and all that. And the second ingredient is the need to keep the music going. The need to keep the music going in this weird game of musical chairs that we're playing, because as soon as the music stops, everything collapses. These two ingredients are interrelated, as my discussion will kind of show later on in this video. I did want to delineate between the two though, because the shrinking pool of money is a very targeted cause, a very specific cause that we can point to in the news that's very concrete, that's happening in distinct ways, whereas the need to keep the music going has been a perpetual feature of the AI bubble. Nevertheless, I think they're both important to touch upon. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about in the chapter of desperation is the issue of circularity. This is not a new issue in the world of the AI bubble. You've probably seen that infamous chart from Bloomberg that shows all of the companies tied together in weird ways. Bloomberg has actually issued a couple different versions of this chart, and I will make sure to link both of those in the sources below, and also maybe put them up on the screen and post. I don't know, we'll see. But the reason why I want to touch upon the issue of circularity is that this is the sort of core part of keeping the music going. This is the core part of funneling money between companies so that they all seem to be making more money than ever before. It's also a really convenient way to make the pool of money seem like it's not shrinking, even though it is a finite pool of money, and especially because of all of the outsized spending through venture capitalism and other sort of investment mechanisms, the appetite for pouring more and more money into the pool of money is going down, meaning that the pool of money is indeed shrinking. Okay, so keeping the issue of circularity in the background, there are other things that have been happening that are, again, more targeted, more specific. One big one that's been in the news has been the matter of IPOs and market shenanigans. So IPOs, short for initial public offering. This is the way that companies go from being private companies that are not listed on the stock market to being publicly listed companies that are listed on the stock market. SpaceX has been in the news a lot because of its massive IPO that has led Elon Musk to being the world's first ever trillionaire, allegedly. I don't know if I believe that number, but that's another matter. And OpenAI and Anthropic both are making moves to perform their own IPOs as well. On top of all of this, Google, or Alphabet, but Google, has recently issued or started to issue an $80 billion sale in its own equity. How I interpret all of this, and again, this is a matter of my personal opinion, this is a matter of my view on the situation, I could very well be wrong. How I view this is that all of these companies are in this weird state of competition with one another, where they're all competing to get their IPOs out the door as fast as possible. There are sort of historical reasons for this. Generally speaking, companies that IPO first among their competitors tend to do better. There can also be negative downwind effects. If the first company who offers an IPO doesn't do well, it can affect companies more negatively down the line because then there's more doubt about competitors in that space. There's also, I would say, again, a matter of opinion, a level of panic among these companies about the amount of money that's available for investment. This is the shrinking pool of money issue. So not only are SpaceX and Anthropic and OpenAI panicked about how much money they will be able to attract from investors through their IPOs, It seems like Google, or Alphabet, a more senior company that had its initial public offering decades ago, is also worried about this and is also offering sales of its equity to try to attract money away from these newcomers and to heat money into its own equity. Generally speaking, when we're talking about investment and the amount of money available for investment, we're talking about a zero-sum situation in which money that is used to buy stock of one company has to come from somewhere. You can't just create money, obviously. You need to have it on hand. So a common way that investors come up with the money to buy stocks of a company that has gone public through an IPO is by selling stock of older companies. This is what I mean when I say it seems like there's a panic among these companies to hoard as much money in the shrinking pool of money as possible. I am not the only one who has had thoughts about competition within the shrinking pool of money. I'll link some sources below that talk about this in more detail. One other thing to flag here within these companies' IPOs or within Google's equity sale hasn't anything to do directly with either panic about the shrinking pool of money or a need to keep the music going. It's more so tied to the long-term performance of these companies into later this year and into 2027. There's a lot of risk right now in the AI industry. It's not clear that AI as a technology can financially perform the way that these companies say that it can. Despite these risks, certain stock market indexes are fast-tracking these companies to allow them to enter the indexes in a way that is very risky for the rest of the stock market. So for example, SpaceX was fast-tracked into the NASDAQ 100 index. And what this means is that usually there are certain requirements, certain profitability requirements that companies have to achieve in order to be listed in a stock index. Instead, SpaceX is going to be allowed essentially early entry into the index without having to prove those profitability metrics. If that sounds dangerous to you, that's because it is. There's even been some internal debate within at least one of these companies about whether they're ready for an IPO. There have been disagreements between OpenAI's CFO Sarah Fryer and its CEO Sam Altman about whether the company can handle being publicly listed in 2026. There's also the perception that these companies can't afford not to pursue an IPO because of the aforementioned shrinking pool of money, competition among peers, need to keep the music going. The issue being that with all of this risk, there's a chance that one or maybe several of these companies does not perform the way that it should, does not perform well later on this year or into next year. And especially if OpenAI stock doesn't perform well as the sort of poster child of AI, it seems like that could break the entire illusion of AI. It seems like OpenAI is positioned to blow this whole thing up and stop the proverbial music. Next, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the financial engineering that has been propping up this entire industry. I've previously spoken in the past about the weird ways that these private AI companies like Anthropic and OpenAI count their income. This is stuff like annualized revenue, not actual annual revenue, that may obscure the real revenue of these companies. But more recently, there have been questions about how Anthropic suddenly became very profitable in the second quarter of 2026. It seems like there may have been weird ways in which Anthropic is counting both its expenses and its revenue such that for a short period of time, it is profitable. The news here was also careful to point out that Anthropic may not stay profitable, meaning that this 1 quarter of profitability is kind of just a blip on the radar. But I don't think that it's a coincidence that Anthropic magically has this profitable quarter, and it's also making moves to have its IPO. The financial engineering of the AI industry is a really complicated topic. I suspect that there will be whole books written about this topic when the AI bubble pops, in part to help answer the question of how did this even happen in the first place? Like, how were we all convinced to think that these companies were profitable when they clearly weren't? The answer may well be a lot of numerical smoke and mirrors. Another marker of the chapter of desperation here is AI companies moving their enterprise business to token-based pricing. They are specifically doing this at the enterprise level, which is the level of their companies that caters to other businesses. A little educational sidebar in case you're not familiar with what tokens are. Tokens are the basic building blocks of AI inputs and outputs. These building blocks consist of combinations of letters, numbers, and symbols. So there are combinations of letters, numbers, and symbols in the inputs of AI, so the prompts of AI, and there are combinations of these tokens in the outputs of AI. It takes a lot of processing power to handle both of these inputs and especially the outputs. That's why tokens are so expensive. You can think of tokens as a sort of digital processing currency of AI. The more currency you need, so the more tokens you need, the more expensive in general a given task is. There has been a lot of movement in this direction in part because these companies that are customers to OpenAI and Anthropic are the most expensive users of these AI products. These companies have dozens of employees that are using AI all the time to write code and develop software. They are a lot more expensive than just normal users of AI who are asking ChatGPT for dinner instructions, for example. The token-based billing differs from the previous type of billing, which was usually just a flat fee for a certain service. So OpenAI or Anthropic would charge a company maybe $10,000 or whatever number per user, and that user would be able to use their services to the extent that they wanted. Instead, now OpenAI and Anthropic are metering that use. They're saying, if you use our services a certain amount, you have to pay a certain amount. The more you use it, the more you pay. The issue with this is that despite the fact that LLMs are still heavily subsidized, per use cost is incredibly expensive for these companies. And alongside Anthropic and OpenAI's Codex, there's also Microsoft's GitHub Copilot, which has moved in this direction as well. I just want to make sure it's clear that these companies are not necessarily making these moves unilaterally or across the board in all cases. It might be tied to specific services that they offer to certain companies. Nevertheless, it has effects among how people and businesses perceive these services and how they respond to this new pricing scheme. This brings me to the next part of the chapter of desperation, which is the subsequent cutting of prices of these tokens. In response to Anthropic, OpenAI, and GitHub Copilot moving in this direction, its customers, so other companies, are starting to complain about the inordinate costs of AI. The most infamous example of this happening was when Uber COO Andrew McDonald recently said that AI was costing his company too much, and there wasn't a clear return on that cost. In other words, Uber is spending all of this money on AI, and it's not getting anything return. It's not seeing productivity gains or profitability gains. Anthropic and OpenAI are now both considering cutting their token pricing. There was a whole Wall Street Journal exclusive talking about this, which I'll link below. The exclusive's reporting explicitly said that OpenAI was considering significant cuts in order to be able to compete with Anthropic. This might indicate a pricing war between the two companies. A pricing war between two highly unprofitable companies would be really interesting and would test their financials in ways that they haven't previously been tested. It's also a really bad idea for these companies to cut their pricing of their models because they are so unprofitable. I get that they're just trying to make their customers happy, but when you're already hemorrhaging money and you're relying on investors continuing to shovel money into you so you can stay alive, the last thing that you should do is cut your pricing. The real costs of AI are starting to show in the industry elsewhere as well. This is twofold. There are companies who are trying to build out AI, so they are building data centers and buying a ton of chips to put in those data centers. But there's also a lot of companies, especially tech companies, that are just using AI a lot. For the first group, the companies who are building out AI, this ties back to the issue of the shrinking pool of money. Investors are becoming more wary of shoveling more money into the burning pile that is AI. Banks and other lending institutions are becoming afraid to lend more money to these AI companies. So these companies have to come up with money to fund the AI build-out. How are they doing that? Layoffs. There have been a lot of tech layoffs since around 2022. There have also been narratives that AI would lead to the obsolescence of jobs, leading to more layoffs. At first, some of these more recent layoffs were being passed off under the guise of AI and efficiency gains. But as these layoffs have progressed into spring and now summer 2026, it seems like it might just be a cost-cutting measure. A number of large tech companies like Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, Snap, and Block have all pursued layoffs recently. A lot of these companies are spending a lot of money either on the AI build-out or just on AI itself. Interestingly, a lot of these companies and their CEOs are trying to frame this a little bit differently. Cloudflare sent a memo to its staff saying that its layoffs were not a cost-cutting measure. There is also the long-standing question of how many of these companies simply overhired during the pandemic. It might be the case that some of these moves are cost-cutting measures to help pay for AI or AI build-out. It might be the case that these companies are just correcting for their overhiring during the pandemic. It might be some weird mix of these two or an additional third and unknown thing. What is clear is that AI is taking its toll out on tech companies and any company that uses AI. In addition to layoffs, there have been cost-cutting measures elsewhere. Some AI companies, and OpenAI in particular, are known to have shuttered some of their more expensive AI offerings. Back in April of this year, OpenAI infamously shut down Sora, its slot-producing app. Around the same time, it said it would stop working on its adult-only mode, or its bot. I want y'all to know that I brought the receipts of how I predicted this verbatim back in February of this year. The closure of expensive services like Sora, and in general the narrowing of the scope of AI, does not bode well for the AI bubble. These companies, if they are so magical and can do all of these great things, should be offering more services, not fewer. In response to a lot of this bad press, these AI companies have been drumming the beat of AI to help keep the music going a little bit longer. This isn't new, they've been doing this kind of stuff for a while. In April of this year, there was a lot of fear and concern about Mythos, Anthropic's new computer breaking model. Cal Newport, a professor of computer science at Georgetown, said a lot of the chatter around Mythos was just hype. Yes, LLMs have changed the cybersecurity landscape, but Mythos was just one step in that. It didn't fundamentally alter the cybersecurity scene. And then, a few days ago, Anthropic released Fable 5, a version of its Mythos model. So if Mythos is this computer-breaking model that is unsafe to release, why did they then just release another version of it later? It seems to me like a prolonged stunt to keep the hype going, and to keep the music going so this whole thing doesn't just go down in flames. The final point of the chapter of desperation that I want to talk about is the potential for a bailout and the AI industry's incessant ingratiation with the United States government. This has taken shape in a couple different ways. For example, OpenAI began offering its ChatGPT services to United States government agencies for $1 a year per agency. Then in February 2026, Fast Company released an interview with Philippe Malone, OpenAI's head of government sales. The title of this interview was "OpenAI Wants to Get the Government Hooked on ChatGPT." Then in November, a really spicy thing happened. OpenAI CFO Sarah Frier said at a press event that OpenAI was seeking some kind of government guarantee for its chip purchases. I actually have a CNN article pulled up that I'll read to you from just to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting anything here. The CNN article states, OpenAI's chief financial officer Sarah Frier raised eyebrows on Wednesday when she suggested that the US government should backstop the company's aggressive investments in artificial intelligence infrastructure. And then there's a direct quote, "The backstop, the guarantee that allows the financing to happen, that can really drop the cost of the financing, but also increase the loan to value, so the amount of debt that you can take on top of an equity portion," she said at a Wall Street Journal event. CNN goes on to characterize her statement. In other words, a federal government backstop for the debt AI companies take on to make chip investments. There was such strong backlash to Sarah Frier's statements that Sam Altman later had to walk some of them back. Despite that though, Sam Altman has also refused not to pursue those government backstops. More recently, the United States government and the president himself have expressed interest in the US government buying shares of these AI companies. On June 4th of this year, Notice published an article reporting that senior US officials had met with the top executives of different tech companies to talk about buying shares in AI companies. That same article noted that Sam Altman had met with US government officials himself. Altman even pitched the idea directly to the president back in early 2025. This story caused a little bit of a blip in the news, but I worry that it's been buried under SpaceX IPO drama. The concept of the government buying or otherwise acquiring shares of AI companies is really dangerous. First of all, the government is supposed to regulate AI. We desperately need AI regulation. There would be a clear conflict of interest if the US government owned part of AI companies that it was also trying to regulate. Government ownership of these AI companies would also incentivize a bailout even more. I'm honestly really worried that this was not spoken more about in the news. I'm not convinced that these AI companies should even exist, let alone be partially owned by the United States government. To recap the entire chapter of desperation, we have 1. The matter of circularity, 2. IPOs and equity sales to gobble up whatever remains of the shrinking pool of money, 3. Financial engineering, 4. The move to token-based pricing, 5. The cutting of those same token costs, 6. Layoffs to cut costs further, 7. The closure of expensive AI services to, again, cut costs further, 8. A continuation of your typical hype and clout farming, and 9. Signals for a bailout and other forms of government ingratiation. Some of these things, like the matter of circularity or hype farming, have been happening for years now, but a lot of the things that I've talked about just now have only occurred in the last couple of months. This is why I feel like there is credible evidence that the AI bubble might be popping. If there are things that you think that I've missed here, or maybe gotten wrong, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'm always eager to learn more. And now we enter the chapter of disillusionment. If the two ingredients of the chapter of desperation were a shrinking pool of money and a need to keep the music going, this is where the money runs out and the music stops. I've already touched on the first point of the disillusionment chapter a little bit, but I think it warrants its own discussion. It's a really big deal that companies now are starting to limit token usage because of how expensive it's gotten. This isn't a problem just for Uber. On June 12th, so just a couple of days ago, the information reported that Meta is circulating a memo that encourages minimizing token use. I guess Meta's internal AI use is projected to cost them billions of dollars a year. In addition to Uber and Meta, there's also the matter of Microsoft canceling most of its Claude Code licenses. The reporting on this suggests that it wasn't that Microsoft didn't want to pay a competitor, it was just too expensive. You know it's bad when the Bill Gates company that treats the US dollar like monopoly money says AI is too expensive. Another recent example of a company abandoning AI use is Starbucks. In late May, it was reported that Starbucks was abandoning use of its AI restocking tool called automated counting. This tool was notorious for making errors and just hallucinating stuff. So companies are starting to note the real costs of AI and are even limiting use in some cases. The financial woes of AI do not start or stop with company costs, though. They extend to banks and other lending institutions that have been saddled with a bunch of AI debt. There are also concerns about AI debt creeping into people's investments without them even knowing about it. As I noted in my AI bubble video that I published in February, this is the part of the AI bubble that I'm really worried about. People tend to compare the AI bubble to the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s, but I worry it's going to be more like the 2008 financial crisis. In general, there's been an increase in reporting on the risks of AI debt and private credit. Reuters reported in March of this year that banks are starting to charge higher interest rates for loans to private credit funds that are entangled with AI companies. This actually reverses the trend of cheaper interest rates that existed before November 2025. The private credit bubble, and AI alongside it, have become so concerning that the US government is starting to take note. The US Department of the Treasury actually met with insurance regulators to talk about private credit lending back in March of this year. The reporting here notes that private credit lenders are strained by asset quality and liquidity concerns. Asset quality means how good your debt is. Do you anticipate this debt getting paid back? Liquidity is a key word here too. The 2008 financial crisis was really a liquidity crisis. A liquidity crisis occurs when too many bad bets in investment and debt markets have been made, such that lending institutions run out of money to lend to each other or to the broader economy. The worry within the United States government is strong enough that the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, is specifically seeking to prevent contagion within private credit. If buzzwords like contagion and liquidity and asset quality have you very worried, you are not alone. I genuinely do not understand how these news stories get published, and there aren't alarm bells ringing everywhere all the time. Widespread concerns about private credit are so deep that they get reflected in the stock market. Blue Owl, one of the most notorious private credit firms that's deeply embedded in the AI build-out, has lost half of its stock value in the past year. There are also concerns that we don't know how bad the private credit and AI debt issues are. Private credit is notoriously tricky to measure because it's opaque. It's not regulated in the same way that normal banking is. In fact, it's so opaque that people refer to it as shadow banking. There are also clever accounting tricks afoot that keep debt off of companies' balance sheets such that we don't know how much AI debt there is. Moody's reported back in February 2026 that hyperscalers, so Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, all have more debt off of their balance sheets than on them. If that wasn't bad enough, there are more concerns now about how all of this investment and debt will affect people's retirement funds. The IPO of SpaceX and the potential IPOs of Anthropic and OpenAI make this risk very real. This is because when companies get listed on the stock market, they can then enter stock indexes, which are a huge part of US retirement funds. As I mentioned before, some indexes are waiving the normal profitability requirements to fast-track SpaceX's entry into them. To be fair, not all of them are doing this. But if SpaceX's stock performs really poorly, and these indexes perform really poorly as a result, it means a lot of people's retirement funds are going to also perform poorly. There are also subtler ways of AI debt making its way into people's retirement and pension funds. One mechanism is bond funds, which are traditionally seen as conservative and therefore safe ways of making investments for retirement and pension funds. Unfortunately, a lot of AI debt related to companies like Oracle and OpenAI has been making its way into these bond funds. If Oracle or OpenAI, companies with really dubious business models and a lack of profitability, default on their bonds, then these bond funds will get hit as well. One final mechanism here is that of life insurers. These companies are increasingly seeking to fund retirement plans with AI debt. What this all means is that there might be a ton of retirement funds that are completely riddled with AI debt, and the people who hold those funds don't even know about it. Fortunately, as part of the chapter of disillusionment, there's a lot more reporting on all of this, and all of the concerns that I've been talking about have been a point of major reporting in recent months. It's been a lot easier to find reporting on the risk of AI now than it was just a couple months ago when I was making my first AI bubble video. So it's not just that the risks exist, it's that more governments, journalists, and banks are starting to take note of the issue. This is what I mean by disillusionment. The mirage of AI is breaking amongst its most powerful backers. I don't necessarily think the United States government is going to make good moves here, by the way, but it's good that they're at least taking note of it. The noting of it itself might be what pops the bubble. Another part of the chapter of disillusionment is the matter of stock sell-offs in the tech industry. This point is admittedly a little bit hand-wavy, so I don't want to rely on it too much. In early June, we've seen a ton of stock sell-offs, especially among companies that manufacture chips or are embedded in that process. Macroeconomic questions about inflation and interest rates, along with SpaceX's massive IPO, have introduced a lot of sensitivity here. What's really funny in all of this is how Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, is trying to play this all off. In response to some of the biggest tech stock sell-offs we've ever seen, Jensen Huang said that this was a buying opportunity because the AI build-out had just begun. Bruh, what? The AI build-out has been happening since 2022, maybe even earlier. Like, what are you even talking about? The sell-off was so bad that a number of financial institutions like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and JP Chase have raised warning flags. Bank of America specifically warned that there were signs of a bear market. Financial analysts have been labeling this as a wake-up call to investors. They warned that the debt-fueled spending on AI will stall if there aren't clear returns. Hello, it is future, but still somehow past me to tell you that while I was editing this video, tech stocks continue to slide in late June. Investor concerns are twofold here. One, they fear the AI build-out with chips is too expensive for the build-out itself and also for the rest of consumer electronics. After all, investors want Apple to be able to sell iPhones or whatever too. The second set of concerns is that there is news now that OpenAI may not go public until 2027. This seems to be because SpaceX has lost a lot of its value since its IPO. Oops, who could have foreseen this? And OpenAI reportedly can't get its financials to back the $1 trillion IPO value that it wants. I'll touch more on this later in this video. That brings me to the growing public acknowledgement that AI isn't what it's built to be. The best examples of this are, of course, coming from Anthropic and OpenAI. Both of their CEOs recently said that AI won't lead to the massive job losses that they've been warning about for years. Part of this might be the CEOs trying to soften the image of their companies before their IPOs. But I also think that these companies are being forced to confront the fact that the hype of AI is very different from the reality of AI. As public evidence of the capabilities or lack thereof of this technology mounts, they can't hide it anymore. This brings me to the final part of the chapter of disillusionment, and perhaps the most important one. A technical way of thinking about this is the mainstreaming of criticism of AI and the AI industry. A less specific but weirdly more helpful way of thinking about this is a vibe shift in the public discourse on AI. For example, we saw in late 2025 and early 2026 the rise of the term AI washing. This term was coined to describe the phenomenon of companies using AI as a cover for layoffs and other financial mismanagement. Lots of studies and news stories show again and again that AI is to blame for very few, if any, layoffs. Or at least efficiency gains from AI are not a cause of layoffs. As I noted before, the cost of AI might be leading to a lot of layoffs, but that's a very different matter. There is evidence of this vibe shift outside of the rise of terms like AI washing. Let's look at the recent work of Ed Zitron, one of the world's biggest AI haters, but also one of the world's foremost journalists on AI. He wrote in a recent newsletter that he has an upcoming story that might just pop the AI bubble itself. At the very least, he expects this story to make big waves in the world of AI and the AI industry. Ed isn't in the business of making big claims like this and then not being able to follow through. If he says that he has something big, I trust him on it. Needless to say, I'm very curious to see what it is that he reports on. Hello, I am the future past version of myself, here to tell you that Ed Zitron did in fact cover the big thing that he was talking about. While editing this video, he published it, and I made a big enough deal about it here that I thought it needed additional discussion. On June 15th, Ed posted an article on his website titled, "Exclusive, OpenAI losses increased nearly 8 times in 2025, with spending hitting $34 billion. There are a lot of interesting numbers in this piece, namely the comparison of revenue, costs, expenses, and losses between 2024 and 2025 at OpenAI. Again, I'm not a financier, thank God, so please take what I say here as my opinion and nothing else. There are 2 sets of numbers Ed seems to focus on both in this exclusive and in a follow-up interview he did with the Tech Report. One set is losses from operations, seen here in his exclusive. Another is the difference in attributable loss between 2024 and 2025. I highly recommend you read Ed's exclusive and watch his Tech Report interview yourself to form your own opinion. My main takeaway from these numbers is that OpenAI seems to be spending a heck of a lot more money on all sorts of things despite its significant revenue growth. This is even more evidence to me that there seems to be no path to profitability for OpenAI. Keep in mind the opacity here, as OpenAI declined to comment on the matter and is not required to publicly publish its financials. There is a lack of clarity here on what these numbers fully mean beyond an indication of worsening losses and expenditures. The FT published a concurrent report with Ed's exclusive that is also worth reading yourself. It includes statements from a person familiar with the matter that characterized OpenAI's outsized losses as more of a one-off. Even if I give OpenAI the biggest benefit of the doubt, these numbers nevertheless seem to be trending in the wrong direction. What spoke to me the loudest here, honestly, had little to do with the specific finances of OpenAI and had more to do with the how and why of Ed's exclusive. I assume, based on what I know about how companies in the media work, that somebody high up at OpenAI leaked this info to Ed. That's just my assumption. I know little about OpenAI's inner corporate structure, mostly to avoid the psychic damage that would cause. Regardless, companies generally do not let just any employee access such sensitive information, especially while they're trying to IPO. If my assumption is correct, then it speaks to a lack of confidence in OpenAI's future at even the most upper echelons of the company. In short, if I were Sam Altman, I would be trying to hunt this person down while sweating about who else might squeal to the press. Meanwhile, markets keep doing this, and now OpenAI might not IPO until 2027. I wonder why. Beyond this, Ed has been making really high-profile appearances in the mainstream media in ways that he hasn't before. For example, he recently appeared as a guest on a Bloomberg podcast. He also recently appeared as a guest on Chris Hayes' MS Now podcast called Why Is This Happening? It isn't like the mainstream media, especially the financial media like Bloomberg, to host known AI critics on his podcasts. The reason why I'm honing in on Ed's work here is because he serves as a great proxy for public tolerance of AI criticism. It's previously been a taboo for mainstream media organizations, and especially financial media organizations like Bloomberg, to host AI critics. AI critics have been treated as rabidly delusional people. The fact that these institutions are hosting AI critics on their platforms means a lot to me. The mainstreaming of AI criticism fits into the broader chapter of disillusionment, alongside increased investor wariness and public complaints about the extreme costs of AI. Unfortunately, it's not enough for the technology to have no financial promise. People need to know that it doesn't have any financial promise. The myth of AI inevitability needs to break. This is more a matter of narrative, a war of words, if you will, than a war of money or technology. Here's a recap of all of the parts of the chapter of disillusionment. First, companies are cutting how much AI they use, and they are making that publicly known. Second is the matter of debt limits and increased financial wariness about the technology. Third is the hand-wavy matter of tech stock sell-offs. I'm calling this a hand-wavy matter because the sell-offs are real and they are substantial, but it's just as easy for these stock prices to rise again. We probably won't know that the AI bubble has popped for several months because it takes a while for financial trends to settle. Fourth is the fact that AI companies are being confronted with the truth about the capabilities or lack thereof of their technology. And last is the mainstreaming of AI criticism, something we haven't really seen before because it's been too taboo. So what do you think? Is the AI bubble popping, or is this just another blip? At the very least, I think we're in for a very bumpy summer and an even bumpier fall. Buckle up, friends, it's gonna get rough out there. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.